Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you of the Jagdtiger Prototype. Have you ever loved the Jagdtiger at tier 9 but hated it when you have to play it constantly against tier 9 and tier 10 tanks? But you hate playing the Jagdtiger 88 because it's got a tiny little pea shooter of a gun? Well, this might be the tank for you. It's got the full Jagdtiger armor down at tier 8 with, albeit not the Jagdtiger gun, kind of like the stock Jagdtiger gun or the Ferdinand gun. And in today's video, I'm going to let you know whether the combination works and whether this is something that you should look into investing into. So firstly, let's compare the Jagdtiger Prototype to the Jagdtiger 88 and the Ferdinand. Now, let me clarify that the Jagdtiger 88 is one of the 30 or so vehicles in the game that has preferential matchmaking, meaning that it can never meet tier 10 tanks, unlike the Jagdtiger Prototype and Ferdinand that will have to play against tier 10s. And it's a good thing too, because when we compare the Jagdtiger 88's gun with regards to penetration alpha damage, you'll see why it doesn't meet tier 10s. So immediately we notice the Jagdtiger Prototype has the worst damage per minute in this comparison, significantly lower than the Jagdtiger 88 and significantly lower than the Ferdinand, which is a shame because it has the same gun as the Ferdinand. It has a 128mm caliber gun with 490 alpha damage, 246mm of standard pen, and premium pen up to 311. This will be the same gun that you get on the Scorpion G, for example, but yeah, you don't have that flexible turret. So all in all, it's kind of both good and bad news for the Jagdtiger Prototype here. Definitely worse than the Ferdinand, but as we know, the armor on this vehicle will start to make up for that disadvantage later on. So what about the gun handling? Aim time, 2.3 seconds, 0.35 accuracy, the same as the Ferdinand. Slightly better dispersion when moving, 7.5 degrees of gun depression, which is a little bit better than the Jagdtiger 88, but half a degree worse than the Ferdinand. It has a significantly worse gun arc at 10 degrees than the Ferdinand, as all of the Jagdtigers have inside the game. So again, gun handling, pretty good for such a meaty gun, but not incredible. How about the mobility of this vehicle? 38 forwards is significantly better than the Ferdinand, 12 backwards is better than the Ferdinand, but not nearly as good as the Jagdtiger 88. However, the power to weight ratio on this tank sucks at 9.34, which is way worse than the Jagdtiger 88 and massively worse than the Ferdinand's. However, it does get a slight ground resistance advantage, which actually means that all of these vehicles are pretty much the same on all terrains. And when we factor in improving your ground resistances with things like off-road driving and the second field mod on this tank, this vehicle is significantly faster than the Ferdinand, especially if you slap a turbo on it. One thing that does really suck about this vehicle, however, is that Wargaming have given it very bad tank traverse, which means that its effective traverse speed is horrible, and it's kind of more like turning a barge around against your opponents. However, you can't fault the armor. This thing has the tier 9 Jagdtiger armor down at tier 8, identical to the Jagdtiger 88 within this regard, and it absolutely destroys the Ferdinand. It has 150mm of effective upper hull armor, but it's angled, so when you are using the gun depression on this tank, it can go up to about 230 effective armor, although your lower plate really does suck on this tank at about 188, even when you're kind of angled a little bit. The Ferdinand, however, has bars which are like 200mm of effective. When you are using the gun depression, it doesn't actually get that much better, unlike the angling on the Jagdtiger. But the real problem with the Ferdinand is the structure here is kind of like 200mm thick, so even when you're angling, it's like 200, 210. That's not going to work against most tanks. For the Jagdtiger, however, it's 250mm thick, and when you are using that 7.5 degrees of gun depression, they need 264mm to have a 50% chance of getting through. So when we compare the Ferdinand and the Jagdtiger using their maximum gun angling against each other when they are firing at each other with the same guns, this is what it looks like. The Jagdtiger Prototype, you've only got a 13% chance of going through. The Ferdinand, you've got an 87% chance of going through. That is the biggest disparity. And even if we look at like the mid plate on the Ferdinand, 95% chance and a horrible angling here, which means they can easily pen it from pretty much every way. The Jagdtiger Prototype doesn't have that. The only problem with the Jagdtiger Prototype is it does have 25mm of flap armor along here, so as it crests a ridge, you're going to be able to shoot up into the track and also destroy the tank. But they can do that with the Ferdinand as well, as it only has kind of like 25mm all along there, which can be truly horrendous. So the Jagdtiger Prototype is in a different class when it comes to how the armor works compared to the Ferdinand. But I'd like to clarify once again that remember, this is only good as long as you're not meeting tier 9 and tier 10 tanks that are firing gold, and as soon as they are, you are going to suffer immensely. As look at the difference between the standard rounds and the gold rounds at 311 against the Jagdtiger Prototype. However, here's the important thing. Because the Jagdtiger Prototype is at tier 8, when it does meet tier 6 and tier 7 tanks and tier 8 tanks, its armor works quite well indeed, unlike against tier 9s and 10s, that its bigger brother, the regular Jagdtiger at tier 9, has to suffer with. In addition to this, the Jagdtiger Prototype has 100 extra hit points than the other vehicles, which means it's quite meaty, especially when you get a durability device on it. Its camera rating is nothing special, but undoubtedly one of the biggest pains of this vehicle is the 370 meters view range. Unlike the Jagdtiger 88, which gets 390, you would never have to use coated optics on the Jagdtiger 88. However, with the Jagdtiger Prototype, you are not spotting your opponents at decent distances, even with a great crew and a premium consumable. Another passing mention should be made to the fire chance of this tank. It's 20 and the engine is at the front of the Jagdtiger. You lose your engine a lot. You get set on fire a lot. You might want to take a fire extinguisher on this tank, and you definitely want to have preventative maintenance on your driver if you don't. So crew-wise, unlike the T3 Jaeger that I featured on the channel yesterday, this vehicle is nice. You can use your Guerilla crew, you can use your Jagdpanzer 100 crew. There's so many different German tanks that can have a 6-person crew, and that means that no crew member has outrageous pressure on them. Your commander has more than enough space to get things like repairs, concealment, brothers-in-arms, and recon. Your gunner, you want to take things like snapshot, deadeye, brothers-in-arms, concealment, repairs to be able to improve things. On your driver, I would thoroughly recommend off-road driving, repairs, clutch braking, and brothers-in-arms on this tank, just to be able to really help with the mobility of the vehicle. Your radio operator only really need brothers-in-arms and situational awareness and repairs and concealment, and your loaders are going to have more than enough space to get every single one of the crew skills. Equipment-wise, I personally like to use gun rammer, durability, and turbo on this thing. This will give you the mobility that you need to get into the fight, and it will give you the durability that you need to be able to brawl with the heavies. If I'm playing on a different kind of map where I feel like the engagement will be more long range, I actually like to drop the durability, drop the turbo, and take vents with coated optics instead. This will give me more than enough view range to be able to spot my opponents at decent distances, while also having that extra firepower boost to be able to deliver some shots to them. I would like to clarify that my first build is what I would use on 60, 70, 80% of the maps in the game, because I feel like this tank is designed to brawl with the heavies. Field mods wise, it's really simple on this tank. Firstly, you want to take reinforced suspension. Next, you want to improve your accuracy. Then you want to improve your view range. And if you're focusing on taking a bonus slot, I would probably recommend to take survivability, so you can improve your hit points a little bit more. And for when you want to use the other build, that it'll be boosting up the vents instead, which you want to put into slot 2 while also still getting your gun rammer going. But anyway, I think that's quite enough jibber jabber. Let's put the Jagdtiger Prototype to the test. So firstly, we're going to be rolling out against a tier 8 and a tier 7 matchup on Fjords. Now, the Jagdtiger Prototype, unlike the T3 Jaeger, which I featured yesterday on the channel, is not a new tank inside the game. This vehicle has actually been out for a year on the Asia server. And so we actually have some statistics to see how it is performing. It is not performing half badly on the Asia server, even though it's not exactly a really popular tank. And that is because it was only sold, I believe, once inside some kind of special lucky envelopes shenanigans last year, along with the TL7. So I wasn't lucky enough to be able to get the Jagdtiger Prototype on my Asia server account, but I was lucky enough to be able to get the TL7, which is how I was able to get you an early opinion on that vehicle for YouTube. So the Jagdtiger Prototype, let's get into position and see how this armor is going to work. Now remember, you want to do everything you can to not expose your lower plate, but I found myself a really nice position here where I can still make use of this 7.5 degrees of gun depression, and this BZ-176 is the most OP tank at tier 8 meets the Jagdtiger Prototype, and well, I've got 128mm, and that means that I can overmatch all of the turret armor on the BZ-176 at the top. So we put one shot in, we're going to put 2 shots in, and hey, you don't look so OP anymore, Mr. BZ-176. I think this is the perfect example of what this vehicle is really designed to do. You know, Heavy tanks are great in hold down positions. Don't get me wrong, the Viper is an absolute beast of a tank destroyer as well. But this is a Jagdtiger down at tier 8. Its armor might not work against the tier 9s and the tier 10s. That guy just spent 7,000 credits to do 74 damage to me. And I've already done 2,000 damage. How different is it having alpha damage in World of Tanks, unlike the 420 that we had on the T3 Jaeger yesterday, right? The T3 Jaeger, for me, seems like it just doesn't really maximize the opportunities. The Jagdtiger Prototype definitely is. Alpha damage showing why it is king inside World of Tanks. 2,560 damage dealt to completely OP tank destroyers at tier 8 and heavy tanks in the form of the BZ-176. Unfortunately though, once you've kind of crippled the enemy and they realize they really can't poke against you anymore, what do we do now? Do we go in against the BZ-176s? Do we show them our lower plate? And oh my lord, there's actually one right there, so I'm gonna have to get back. Luckily, it doesn't look like he hit my lower plate, just hit my upper plate. And I tell you what, if it hit my lower plate there, that was 900. Luckily, hit my upper plate and it was only 100 damage. So that was a little bit scary there against that BZ-176. I can't believe he was actually able to hide in there, but maybe that was down to switching out AP, switching out APCR to see if we can be able to get a cheap overmatch there on the BZ-176. Come on, baby, I got you. Oh, no. Does 129 damage to me and actually damages my engine through the upper plate. That's the new shot there. That's pretty wild. And yeah, I would thoroughly recommend preventative maintenance on your driver on this tank. You must use preventative maintenance because every time your engine gets damaged, there's a 20% base chance that you're going to be set on fire. But with preventative maintenance, you can like lower it down to, I think you can lower it down by about 1/3 of the chance. So maybe more like a 14% chance to be set on fire. It is quite risky in this tank to not be using a fire extinguisher, but I still feel like you have to have a repair kit, and this thing loses crew members quite frequently as well. One thing I would like to add about this tank is if you can afford it, and really considering it as a premium tank, you should be able to afford it. I would recommend using a large repair kit on this vehicle because quite often it loses its tracks and it loses its engine at the same time. And having a large repair kit means that when you're in those awkward scenarios, you will be able to repair your tracks and your engine at the same time and just keep going. Really, the Jagdtiger Prototype doesn't have fancy gameplay. It is just brute force. It's thick armor, it's a dastardly gun, and I think this is just the perfect game to show what this vehicle is all about. I'm a chonky boy tank who took a fight to very dangerous tank destroyer like in the Viper, and not one but two BZ-176s. And look how many hit points they have between them. They've got like a quarter of what the hit points I've got left if you add them both together in that scenario. And it really shows you just how much raw mass and power the Jagdtiger Prototype has. But only if you can kind of just slow the gameplay down. And so do you know what? This tank kind of behaves more as if it's like a heavy tank within that regard, that just locks down a position. But it's also not that slow, as we can see, lurching forwards. Hopefully we're going to get the AMBT here. Wait for him to come around the corner. Shut him down. The VK looks like he takes a swing at me, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get the CS-44 as they are just chilling above. We lose some hit points to the UDES. We put a good shell there into the CS-44, removing them from the game. And luckily we bounced the gold shell from the CS-44 as well, although it looks like it hit our tracks. Now we're up to 3,000 damage. The UDES hits me. I look for the T-25 too, but I'm going to have a nice easy shot into the UDES, into the Object 252U. You can start to see that while you do have a good amount of hit points on this vehicle, which I've improved with the durability device, even when you're trading 390 receive for 490 that you deal, it's definitely not the best trade deal in World of Tanks history. But we're doing damage, man. 4,000 is not a bad game, but unfortunately we've been reduced to a one-shot now. I'm hoping that UDES, I'm just looking at him to see if he's going to fire at someone. He does, he fires, so I'm going to come around the corner again and look for a shell in the UDES, and hopefully I'll be able to fire quick enough to be able to get back. And now 4,700 damage dealt in this game. But oh no, oh not like this. I'm hopefully reversing so he hits the Emil instead. Wow. I guess the OP heavy tank had the last laugh there, boys and girls. They were licking their wounds around the corner, but they managed to get us eventually. Luckily, after a really ugly game, my team managed to eventually dig out the camping BZ-176 and shut them down at the end of this round. GG indeed. So let's do it again with round 2. Once again, playing against now full tier 8 tanks. Now look, I'm not going to show you gameplay of how this thing performs against tier 9 or tier 10 vehicles. You don't really need to have an extensive imagination. This is not a complicated tank. It is pretty obvious that when you're playing against tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, that as soon as they load gold and they go through your structure, you just feel like you're playing roulette. You've got like as you saw, a 95% chance of being penned as soon as they have about 300 millimeters of pen in this tank, irrelevant of what you do. So then it becomes a case of trading. One thing what I will say is that unlike its bigger brother, the Jagdtiger, which has 560 alpha and has really good damage per minute, it feels so depressing to be able to try and work in those tier 9 or tier 10 games where your armor doesn't count. And then you're just hoping that your opponents either play badly or don't fire gold, and you don't have the alpha damage to trade with them. And you don't have the rate of fire to fire 2 shots for every time they shoot you. If you're playing against a like a 113, for example, something as innocent as a 113, sure, you've got the alpha damage, but they can literally fire almost twice for every time that you are going to be able to reload it very comfortably. So it is incredibly awkward to play the Jagdtiger against higher tier tanks. The other thing that I want to talk about is that while I think the Jagdtiger Prototype is actually pretty good, and for anyone out there who really wants to play a Jagdtiger, this might be the best version of the Jagdtiger in a way. It's not nearly as good as some of the other tank destroyers. Like this turtle. This turtle is an absolute beast. But if I can manage to find this one situation where I sit kind of in this hold down position, the turtle's got like, what, 270 pen? That's only enough to go through me maybe like 1 in 4 times if he fires gold. However, if I spam gold back at the turtle, I have a higher chance of being able to go through him. So as long as I can try and keep this engagement at a good distance, where he's not able to all in me and catch me in my hull armor rather than my structure armor, I'm actually at an advantage compared to the turtle within this regard. And so the Jagdtiger is to all intents and purposes a heavy tank without a turret. But it just feels as if the armor means so much more at tier 8 than the armor does at tier 10. But unlike a lot of the other tank destroyers, like a turtle which has outrageous damage per minute, or like a not the Minotauro, gosh, what is it called? Oh my god, I'm having a moment here. I can't remember what the tier 8, what the hell is the tier 8 Italian tank destroyer called? The Bisonte? No, that's the bloody, how can I not remember this? The blooming Vipera. Unlike the Vipera, which has 5 120mm shells that it can deliver, doing up to 2,000 damage. This vehicle doesn't seem to really have that firepower when its armor doesn't mean anything. But when it comes to just crippling a K2, 2 rounds easily into the lower plate, enough with the HE to be able to deal with the K2 there. This thing feels very strong within that regard. So it's a real tough one, this tank, to gauge as to whether it's going to be really good or not. I think it's going to be good. I don't think it's going to be outrageously overpowered like a turtle, because even though I'm crippling this turtle as I say that, because the turtle has the damage per minute to still be good when its armor isn't enough. Outside of the armor for the Jagdtiger Prototype, this thing just doesn't really have the damage per minute to excel in an all-in fight. And I'm very much looking forward to fighting Jagdtiger Prototypes when I'm playing my tier 9 tanks. Sure, I might get hit once, sure, I might even get hit twice, but I'm going to farm up their entire tank. And hopefully I can manage to ricochet, hopefully they bounce, or I can wait for them to shoot an ally and just come around the corner. And I think just like the T3 Jaeger, this vehicle is going to be an absolute feast to be able to devour. And so I think for a lot of players, the matchmaker could get a little bit better than, for example, the turtle. But I also think, on the other hand, that the turtle is kind of like the perfect tank of dealing with the Jagdtiger Prototype if it can kind of like all in. Because while undoubtedly it's going to take a shot, maybe 2 shots from the Jagdtiger Prototype, it's going to be able to carve up its entire hit points. And as soon as the Jagdtiger's armor is no longer a factor in the engagement, then it's actually very weak. Another thing that we're going to see later on in this replay, and I want you to keep an eye on the minimap for all of you out there who want to be extra aware, is that this vehicle, I haven't showed you really its biggest vulnerability, right? It will be coming later on in this game. So in this kind of a scenario, I'm just expecting that this Scorpion is going to poke around the corner and I want to be able to go after them. I felt like when I was playing my Jagdtiger Prototype that quite often I was fishing. I have to sit in a position. I have to hide my lower plate. I have to hide my hull armor. And for some reason there, I thought that maybe I was playing against the most sneaky Scorpion ever. I thought that maybe they'd come around the corner and they just had an exhaust. But it wasn't to be. And I don't know how I got spotted in this situation, so I'm a little bit confused. I don't think it can be the Charioteer up on the left, but it dawns on me. It's a TVP. So we're going to lurch forwards. They're going to pull back. The TVP has really good heat. Will be more than enough to go through this thing's structure. In this kind of a situation, I've still got to be careful. I've only got 1,000 hit points left. And if the Scorpion hits me, well, we're not going to have very many more hit points after that, right? The TVP's actually got enough camo rating and our view range is poor enough, unlike on the Jagdtiger 88, for him to come around the corner. So a big misplay there by the TVP to come around again. And I wasn't actually spotted. So this is like really weird right now with the vision. I'm wondering if it is the Charioteer who's getting funky angles on me. So I'm just going to sit and I'm going to camp. I'm going to wait for the TVP. So for those of you who are eagle-eyed right now, keep a look on the minimap and try and figure out what possibly may happen very soon. And how much it's going to be so much of a surprise to me when it does happen. I'm still trying to camp out for this TVP. I want to be able to get them. While our team seems to be innocently fighting a Progetto who's got forwards to try and spot for the TDs. Alright, now the Progetto's dead. Looks like things are starting to come back into our team's favor. The Renegade finishes off the Lerva. The Charioteer spots me from above. I spot a TVP, and what is that? And of course, this is the weakness of the Jagdtiger. I lose my engine, I believe. I had to repair it. I don't have a repair kit now. I'm coming down after the Borask, and this Borask is clearly a very good player as they turn their tracks to be able to face the corner that I wasn't going to harass. And then I can't really do anything, and the Renegade finishes me off. Rewind the video, about 20 seconds, if you want to see it actually happen in real time. But I'll explain on the map. The Borask, who was last spotted here, somehow managed to come all the way back and slinky through this area between the Super Pershing and the Peregrine and come up behind. That is a pretty impressive feat when you think that the Super Pershing and the Peregrine had been sitting on this ridgeline for so long. So, wow, the Borask must have picked their moment perfectly to be able to sneak up behind. And yeah, the Jagdtiger 88 definitely, or the Jagdtiger Prototype in this case, definitely isn't very good when a Frenchie's managed to get behind you. And so, for all of the Jagdtiger's awesomeness, with its frontal armor and its big boy Ferdinand gun, as soon as there's one person behind you, or as soon as somebody manages to get your side, this vehicle feels awful. So our game on Fjords was an ace tanker for the Jagdtiger Prototype with 4,686 damage, 112,000 credits profit, as we didn't need to fire any gold. But unfortunately on Mannerheim line, my team go on to lose it with an impressive carry from the Borask, who manages to get maybe close to an ace tanker in the tank with 4,000 damage and 4 kills, so GG, well played to him. Before that, we were absolutely slamming it with 82,000 credits profit and near 4,000 damage. But as soon as you get flanked, this vehicle feels awful. So on the Asia server, the Jagdtiger Prototype actually has the 4th best win ratio of any premium tank destroyer at 51%. Although it's not played very much, and I'm sure the kinds of players who have it are probably the more hardcore players. And so whether or not it deserves that position remains to be seen. Now I think all in all, this vehicle's probably not quite as good as a Kari, and I don't think it's nearly as good as a Turtle. However, it is a decent tank within its own right, and I know how much people love playing German tank destroyers. And unlike the Jagdtiger 88, which really has to just drive around the corner and hope that it can isolate a tank and trade its hit points to be able to penetrate with its lowly 88mm with its terrible pen and terrible alpha, this one can actually hang back, get itself into a position and truly out-trade its opponents, unlike the Ferdinand. The Ferdinand, in all of the games that you saw today, would have just been completely farmed with its inferior armor, whereas the Jagdtiger Prototype was able to use its armor advantage to negate the firepower of the enemy tanks. And so, once again, I think the Wargaming have actually done a really good job with balancing the Jagdtiger Prototype. It has the durability, it has the armor advantage, but boy does it have to make some sacrifices in other areas where it does feel significantly worse than the Ferdinand for when you just gotta rip apart your opponents. I guess the real problem that the Jagdtiger Prototype has is that, frankly, the Turtle and the Kari are better vehicles. So unless you're the biggest German tank destroyer fan, I would probably still recommend getting those two tanks. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this tank review and it was useful for you. If it was, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about the Jagdtiger Prototype. Does this look like the Jagdtiger for you? Or are you looking forward to hopefully farming up these low damage per minute, high hit point tanks in the Matchmaker very soon? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.